Hi guys. Now the other day I was reading some Song of Ice and Fire forums and I was shocked to find that not only do a bunch of people still not subscribe to the Jojen Paste theory, but they even call it a tinfoil theory on par with something like Dario equals Euron. Now this was such a surprise to me because I didn't even think this was a theory. I thought this was very clearly implied through the text, so I'm going to break down all of the compelling evidence for this theory and show you why I thought this seemed so obvious to me. Now, in my experience, if you have an inclination to something, if you think something's going on, the author probably put it there for a reason, and I think if we look at the writing conventions George R. R. Martin is using of the subtext and the context around Jojen and this red paste, I think you'll be as convinced as I am. Now, the place most people point to start this theory is a section where Bran is in the cave with Bloodraven and is fed a weirwood paste to strengthen his powers. Now, the text says, something about the look of it made Bran feel ill. The red veins were only weirwood sap, he supposed, but in the torchlight they looked remarkably like blood. He dipped the spoon into the paste, then hesitated. Now, people point to how it makes him feel ill and how the weirwood sap looks like blood, but I think part of the problem with people's reaction to this theory is that it sounds crazy to people who haven't seen the clues previously in the reading. So when you start with this evidence that can be, a simple poetic description, it comes across as weak. And more importantly, it ignores all of the clues we see leading up to this moment. So they aren't in the mindset we are as readers when we see the theory develop. They're not thinking, oh, it's blood, the way you are if you see all the clues beforehand. So I'm going to start this breakdown a few pages back. The situation we have is that Bran, Meera, and Hodor are in the cave with the three-eyed crow, also called Bloodraven, and the children of the forest. We'll start with Bran asking a question, because this chapter, and I think a lot of the Bran storyline in general, is about answering questions via his powers, which gives us the ability to see things we wouldn't otherwise be able to see by going to new locations or back and forward in time. The text says, "What will I know?" Bran asked the reeds afterward, when they came back with torches burning brightly in their hand to carry him back to a small chamber off the big cavern where the singers had made beds for them to sleep. "What do the trees remember?" "The secrets of the old gods," said Jojen Reed. Food and fire and rest had helped restore him after the ordeals of their journey, but he seemed sadder now, sullen, with a weary, haunted look about his eyes. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. "We live closer to the green in our bogs and crannogs, and we remember. Earth and water, soil and stone, oaks and elms and willows. They were here before us all, and will still remain when we are gone." So right from the beginning we're posed with this question, what do the trees remember? Jojen says they remember the secrets of the old gods, but this doesn't mean anything to us yet. So at some point we ought to be finding out what that secret is, and I also want to point out that at this point Jojen is sadder for some reason. We're not sure of what it is, and he's thinking about a time when he won't be alive. The text continues. "So will you," said Meera. That made Bran sad. "What if I don't want to remain when you are gone?" he almost asked, but he swallowed the words unspoken. He was almost a man grown, and he did not want Meera to think he was some weepy baby. "Maybe you could be a green seers too," he said instead. "No, Bran," now Meera sounded sad. "It is given to a few to drink of that green fountain while still in mortal flesh, to hear the whisperings of the leaves, and see as the trees see, as the gods see," said Jojen. "Most are not so blessed. The gods gave me only green dreams. My task was to get you here. My part in this is done." Now this is Jojen, who says he can see the future in his dreams, and he's saying that his part is done. This is highlighting that this story arc is going to end. From the very first book to this mission, and now in book 5, the mission is almost completed. We've arrived at the end of this mission, so on first read we might think something else is going to happen now. Maybe the story will shift, but it seems like the quest they've gone on to bring Bran to the three-eyed crow and help him gain more power, it seems like this quest is going to conclude. So we're left with another question now. If the Reeds can't join Bran, what are they going to do next? That's the thought that's been put in our head by the writer as we move through this chapter. So it's something for us to keep in mind. Now, a few pages later, after learning about some of the functions of the weirwood tree, Bran asks Jojen about them, and the text says, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies," said Jojen. "The man who never reads lives only one. The singers of the forest had no books, no ink, no parchment, no written language. Instead, they had the trees, and the weirwoods above all." I'm going to skip forward a little bit. "The singers believe they are the old gods. When singers die, they become part of that godhood." Bran's eyes widened. "They're going to kill me?" "No," Mira said. "Jojen, you're scaring him. He's not the one who needs to be afraid." Now, I got two big takeaways from this portion. One, Bran doesn't know what's going to happen to him, but there seems to be a lot of talk about death here. And there's also this idea of somehow surviving past death. And we see that in how Jojen is talking about the ways the children of the forest are able to live many lives. But more importantly, this line from Jojen at the end should be an alarm bell. Because it seems like Jojen is a green dreamer who can see the future, as I've said, and that future he sees is that someone needs to be afraid. So the question we're left with is, who needs to be afraid? This sentence here is a warning shot. It's saying something bad is in store for someone. And we learn the answer to that question a few pages later when we get a description of Jojen's strange behavior. The text says, "The moon was a black hole in the sky. Outside the cave the world went on. Outside the cave the sun rose and set. The moon turned. The cold winds howled. Under the hill Jojen grew ever more sullen and solitary, to his sister's distress. She would often sit with Bran beside their little fire, talking of everything and nothing, petting Summer where he slept between them, whilst her brother wandered the caverns by himself. Jojen had even taken to climbing up to the cave's mouth when the day was bright. He would stand there for hours, looking out over the forest, wrapped in furs yet shivering all the same." And we open this sequence with dark imagery of black holes in the sky, which sets us up for more darkness that's to come. It's a very bleak image that's kind of setting this aura of darkness about everything that happens next. Next, we get a description of the world continuing its movement. Outside the sun is rising, and outside the sun is howling, but under the hill, Jojen is growing sullen, and his sister is worrying about him. He's isolating himself from the rest of the group, and it's telling that even when he's out in the bright sunshine, when he ought to be warmer, he's still shivering, even though he's covered in furs. So what all of this is hinting at is that the reason he's shivering is not to do with the temperature. So the situation that we have set up here is that Jojen is growing separate not only from people, but also from the rest of the world. When you consider the imagery of the natural world turning without him, and him not feeling natural weather effects, what I read from that is that he's separating from the natural world. He's not only separating from people, but the world in general. It's almost like he's a ghost. So let's look at why this is. And in the next passage, Mira kind of explains, saying, "He wants to go home," Mira told Bran. "He will not even try and fight his fate. He says the green dreams do not lie." Now, I zoomed on this expression "going home" because I've seen people have a question about, what exactly does that mean? But going home is a euphemism for dying. It's the idea that, say a soldier during the war said, "I'm ready to go home." It's this idea that you'll leave whatever troubles you're dealing with and you'll return to a place warm and comfortable. It's also important to note that Jojen has previously told Mira that he's going to die at home. So that's what she believes when she's saying this. He's resigned to his fate and he's not going to fight. However, I don't quite think this is true, and I'm going to explain why shortly. The text continues. "He's being brave," said Bran. "The only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid," his father had told him once, long ago, on the day they found the dire wolf pups in the summer snows. He still remembered. What's important here is that he recalls that a man can only be brave when they are afraid. This is telling us that Jojen is afraid of something. What that is, we're not sure of yet. Supposedly, he's afraid of going home, where he knows he'll die. But, why is he afraid now? Why wasn't he afraid in the last book? Why is he afraid now that they've reached the hill? Next in the text, we have, "He's being stupid," Mira said. "I'd hoped that when we found your three-eyed crow. Now I wonder why we ever came." "For me," Bran thought. "His green dreams," he said. "His green dreams." Mira's voice was bitter. "Hodor," said Hodor. Mira began to cry. Now this isn't super straightforward. My reading of this little conversation is that Mira believes Jojen will die at home, and perhaps she thought that Bloodraven would somehow be able to change his fate. It's unclear exactly what she thinks, but it seems that she resents the green dreams at least, especially because now they're saying he's going to die soon. And obviously she's sad about that, but I think what we should be asking ourselves now is, one, how is he so sure, but also, how is it going to happen, if it's going to happen? And I think we get a little hint of that in the next sequence when the text reads, "The moon was a crescent, thin and sharp as the blade of a knife." I want to especially point to this little sentence here, that phrase, "thin and sharp as the blade of a knife," because that phrase, this is the second time that phrase has come up. And what that phrase is doing, it's putting the idea of sharpness and blades and violence into our minds. So it's kind of conditioning us to be thinking about this for later. It continues, "The days marched past, one after the other, each shorter than the one before. The nights grew longer. No sunlight ever reached the caves beneath the hill. No moonlight ever touched those stony halls. Even the stars were strangers here. Those things belonged to the world above, where time ran in its iron circles, day to night, to day, to night, to day." Now, all of this imagery, it's showing shortening days, light running out. It's saying how the light isn't touching the place under the hill. It's all creating this very bleak imagery in our head. The text continues. "It is time," Lord Brynden said. Something in his voice sent icy fingers running up Bran's back. Now we have to ask ourselves, why does it send shivers up his back? Why is there all this allusion to death? And I was asking myself when I read this, is something going to happen to Bran? What creepy thing is going to befall him? And next, we'll see that Bran is asking that himself. The text says, "Time for what?" Again, what George R. R. Martin is doing here, by asking these questions, it's making us question what's happening next. "For the next step, for you to go beyond skin changing and learn what it means to be a green seer." Now, to me, this little portion here, asking about what he has to do to become a green seer, it's hearkening back to the little passage I mentioned earlier when Bran is asking Jojen, wait, what do they do to the green seers? Do they kill them? And Jojen is saying he's not the one who needs to be afraid. So we have this again coming back into our heads where, well, who needs to be afraid? What's going to happen? The text says, "The trees will teach him," said Leaf. She beckoned, and another of the singers padded forward, the white-haired one that Mira had named Snowy Locks. She had a weirwood bowl in her hands, carved with a dozen faces, like the ones the heart trees wore. Inside was a white paste, thick and heavy, with dark red veins running through it. "You must eat of this," said Leaf. She handed Bran a wooden spoon. The boy looked at the bowl uncertainly. What is it? Him asking this question, what is it, makes us question what is it. Because this portion could have very easily been written that Snowy Lux comes in with the bowl and says, "Here, eat this paste. It's made out of werewoods." Instead, by writing the question, what is it, George R. R. Martin is making us question, what is it? Next, we'll get back to where we began. A paste of weirwood seeds. Okay. But now I say to myself, again, why is there all of this creepiness? The text continues. Something about the look of it made Bran feel ill. The red veins were only weirwood sap, he supposed. but in the torchlight they looked remarkably like blood. He dipped the spoon into the paste, then hesitated. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this mention of blood, along with all of this creepiness now that we've heard about, this is kind of saying to us, it's saying there's violence here, there's bodies here, something is wrong. Then Bran asks, will this make me a green seer? Your blood makes you a green seer, said Lord Brynden. This will help awaken your gifts and wed you to the trees. Now, this is when we learn about what Bran has to do to gain his next level of powers. This is an answer to that question. What we've been left instead with a bunch of questions about what is so wrong about this? What's so wrong about this situation? What we should have an unpleasant sensation of something being off. And that idea, that feeling is going to continue when the text says, had a bitter taste, though not so bitter as acorn paste. The first spoonful was the hardest to get down. He almost retched it right back up. The second tasted better. The third was almost sweet. The rest he spooned up eagerly. Why had he thought that it was bitter? This says, yes, why had he thought it tasted bitter to begin with? Again, we have this series of questions in this portion of the text where we're getting all these questions. What's really going on here? That's what this is making us think. What's really going on here? And so when it asks us, why had he thought it was bitter? We have to think about, why did he think it was bitter? What is wrong with it where it has a bitter taste, but it doesn't quite taste like something he's familiar with? It doesn't quite taste like nuts. And what all of this is doing is it's putting into question what the paste actually is. And so after he eats the paste, he has visions of his father. He has a little conversation with Bloodraven about him being able to interact with the past. But so when he has another dream, and when he wakes up, the text says, Hodor carried Bran back to his chamber, muttering Hodor in a low voice as Leaf went before them with a torch. He had hoped that Mira and Jojen would be there, so he could tell them what he had seen, but their snug alcove in the rocks was cold and empty. Hodor eased Bran down into his bed, covered him with furs, and made a fire for them. Now, we should be asking ourselves, where did those two go? And I think that line, the rock was cold and empty, is also kind of symbolically, if you talk about the emotion of cold and empty, it's saying that something is missing. Something that ought to be there is no longer there. The text continues. Watching the flames, Bran decided he would stay awake till Mira came back. Jojen would be unhappy, he knew, but Mira would be glad for him. He did not remember closing his eyes. So here we have Bran's next actions dependent upon Mira and Jojen returning. And this naturally sets us, as the readers, it sets us up to await their return, because we want to know what happens next. However, after this portion, they don't come back for the rest of the books, and instead Bran has a dream. And in that dream, he sees through the heart tree in the Winterfell Godswood, and first he sees his father, then other past Stark relatives of his, and finally we get this passage. The tree itself was shrinking, growing smaller with each vision, whilst the lesser trees dwindled into saplings and vanished, only to be replaced with other trees that would dwindle and vanish in their turn. And now the lords Bran glimpsed were tall and hard, stern men in fur and chainmail. Some more faces he remembered from the statues in the crypts, but they were gone before he could put a name to them. Then, as he watched, a bearded man forced a captive down onto his knees before the heart tree. A white-haired woman stepped toward them through a drift of dark red leaves, a bronze sickle in her hand. The woman grabbed the captive by the hair, hooked the sickle round his throat, and slashed. And through the mist of centuries, the broken boy could only watch as the man's feet drummed against the earth. But as his life flowed out of him in a red tide, Brandon Stark could taste the blood. So throughout this chapter, we've been getting this progression of questions. What is the secret of the old gods? What is going to happen to the reeds? What are the children of the forest going to do? Who should be worried about what they're going to do? What is Jojen worried about? How is he going to die? Why is Bloodraven giving us all the creeps? Why does this paste look and taste like blood? Where are Jojen and Mira? When are they coming back? And what we get in reply to all of this is a blood sacrifice. The question, what is the secret of the old gods, is answered, and the answer comes in the form of this vision of a blood sacrifice. Now, when I analyze this, I do it with the idea that George R. R. Martin has proven himself to be a skilled and detailed writer. And so the words that get published are put there for a purpose, because a good writer doesn't waste a word. A good writer doesn't say things they don't mean, and the feeling you get after reading a sentence or a paragraph or finishing a chapter, it isn't an accident. It's not a mistake that there are all these questions over what Bran is eating, and that last line of not only the chapter, but also the last line from Bran's point of view in the book is saying he tastes blood. It's literally saying, he's eating blood. And it's a very clear cognitive line. What's he eating? Oh, it looks like blood? It tastes bitter, just like blood would? No, it is blood. I think this is solidified by what we're seeing in Bran's dream thematically. We don't know exactly what's going on in that sacrifice scene. We don't know exactly who it is or why they're doing it, but we know how it relates to the rest of the chapter. What Bran literally sees is the history of the heart tree from the moment it had eyes up until almost the present. And we see seemingly the first thing that it watched was a sacrifice to it. So what we can take away is that it was fed this blood, and from there it grew, and the rest of the werewoods grew around it. And to me, this is a very blatant parallel with Bran's journey in this chapter. At first, he was wary about what he'd have to do to gain Bloodraven's power, and it seems like the answer to that question, what does he have to do to gain the power, is the sacrifice of Jojen. And we saw that Jojen grew depressed and dissociated. Excuse me, that's not a word, is it? And dissociative as time passed at the hill, because he not only saw his death, he saw it happening at the hill, not at home like he said. So, if you ask the question, why does Jojen tell Mira that he'll die at home then? To me, it's because she's not as faithful as he is. And we see that when she questions him trying to fight his fate. She wonders why he doesn't try to fight the dreams that he's having. But she doesn't get green dreams. She isn't as compelled the way he is, because she doesn't get the dreams. She's not as sure that they're real. Because of course she can't be, because she doesn't get them. She doesn't see the power that she has. She doesn't see the power that he has. So he gets these dreams, and he thinks his purpose from them is that he needs to get Bran to Bloodraven. And he's willing to do it even if it means that he'll die at the end, because he thinks it's too important. He thinks, he's saving humanity. He thinks he's on this great mission. He's a true believer in the power of the old gods. So he's certainly willing to lie in order to avoid causing his sister some pain, and not letting her get in the way of completing that quest. Now, I've seen some people ask, how is George R. R. Martin going to kill this important character off screen? And I think it's for largely the same reason that Jojen doesn't tell Mira what's going to happen. Recall that we're reading this in third-person limited perspective, so we're stuck in Bran's point of view. So for us to see anything directly or hear about it directly means Bran would also have to see or hear about it directly. And if Bran were to be directly told he has to eat Jojen, then he might not do it, or he might not have agreed to go to Bloodraven in the first place. So him finding out about it would bring this whole other set of conflicts that might change the trajectory of the story. And what all of the evidence I've lined up is saying is that George R. R. Martin is using as many clues as he can to tell the reader what's happening without being able to tell Bran what's happening. So he's telling an entire story here, but in subtext, because he can't say it directly. So I guess the reason that I'm really disappointed with people saying that this is a tinfoil theory, that to me, George R. R. Martin has worked very hard to tell this beautiful story of a boy willing to walk to his own death because of his faith in the greater good. And I think it's probably, this chapter here is some of the best writing that's in A Dance with Dragons. I want to say that I do think it's possible Jojen is not actually dead, but I think it's, from all of this evidence, it's definitely meant to appear that like he is. And if this was a twist, I don't think I'd like it, because twists George R. R. Martin does are, they subvert our expectation, and especially they subvert the character's expectation. We see the characters are planning and plotting, and they have an objective, and then there'll be something that undermines it. Here, Bran has no idea what's happening to Jojen, so if there was this twist, it wouldn't happen for the character, it would happen for the reader, and we see that he's telling the story in subtext, so it's not even that blatant for the reader. So I think if he was to put that twist, it would really subvert a lot of what I thought was very good work in this chapter. To me, the question here is not, is Jojen dead, but rather, is Mira dead as well? And I think that's an interesting thought, and I'd like to explore it in another video. Meanwhile, stay tuned for my next video, because part of it is going to touch on something that could be a little more evidence for this Jojen Paste theory. And be sure to subscribe to make sure you see that one. If you like this video, it'd be great if you shared my genius with the rest of the world. And I guess my question to you now is, do you believe in the Jojen Paste theory after I've lined it up like this? And if not, I'm not sure how, but try to explain to me why not. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. I'm not quite infallible. So let me know in the comment section below, or you can also reach me on Twitter @largefinger. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. See you next time.